On today's episode of the How Did It Happen podcast, I am talking about one of my favorite podcasts besides mine, which is called Founders. Just the one word, Founders. What's so interesting about this, and I talk about it in the podcast, is how important the past is to us. And not because history repeats itself, but because human nature does. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. And here it is. Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm Mike, and thank you for joining me for this Friday solo episode. So today I want to talk about one of my favorite podcasts besides my own, and it's called Founders. And the title of this episode is Human Nature Repeats. Human Nature Repeats. So I want to start by saying, have you ever tried to learn from the future? Pretty tough, right? By design, of course, right? It's hard to learn from anything that hasn't yet happened. You know, we can speculate on it, and we can make predictions, and we can, imagine what the future is going to be, and can even help create it. I really do believe in that, but it's hard to learn from it because it has not happened. And what about the present? Have you had a lot of success learning from the present? It's kind of hard because, you're right in the middle of it. So I admit I have not been very effective at learning from the present, mostly because the present as well, it's fleeting. It's like disappears faster than the bullet train in today's video. If you ever seen the video of those bullet trains going through a station or something, it's just, they've just gone. And that's how the present feels to me. It's hard to learn from something that is only there for a moment or less. In fact, I should do a podcast on the present because it's really interesting. The present is only the present for the present. And it's like, well, now it's the past. So the future is kind of cool because, it's always coming, and the past is kind of cool because it's always there. But the present is kind of weird because it's here and gone, just like that. So anyway, hard to learn from the future, hard to learn from the present, but that leaves the past, right? And the past is a great place to learn because that's where all the lessons are from what has already happened. And the past is a library from which we can study success and failure and breakthroughs and scams and decency and indecency and everything else. It's all there. And one of the main ways that I'm studying the past these days is by listening to this great podcast that I found, which is simply called Founders, Founders. And its host, his name is David Senra. I had never heard of him until a few months ago when I got turned on to Founders podcast. But this guy, he reads a biography every week. I can't read a biography in like a month, but every week he reads a biography and he synthesizes its lessons into a podcast that feels conversational, even though it's just him talking. And I'll give you an example. He's just in a booth. I don't even think there's a video component to it, but he's in a sound booth or like just doing what I'm doing. And he's telling you about this book, and he's referencing pages and paragraphs and all that from it. But what's really cool is that he acts like he's having like you and he and me, or he and everyone in the audience is having a conversation. And he'll always say things like, you and I talked about this, whatever it was. And he always includes this. He always says, you and I, you and I, you and I. And it really is weird, I guess, in a certain sense, but it's also really cool because he is acting as if the two of us are talking about this book, and it's a good podcast. You should listen to. So I've listened to the Founders a bunch since I first became aware of it, and I've learned so many things about people that some of whom I've heard about, like Henry Ford and Bill Gates and Kobe Bryant, Warren Buffett, Estee Lauder, Thomas Edison, and then some that I have never heard of or I hadn't remembered hearing of, like Vannevar Bush and Jay Gould and others. And he's done over 270 of these episodes so far. And some of them are repeats, like he'll do multiple on biographies about Warren Buffett, for example. And I kind of like that too, because he's not just doing, one book or one biographer's take on a person. Who reads multiple ones and then he shares them with you. If you like what I'm doing with this podcast and want to participate in more of the things I'm thinking about and exploring, subscribe to my newsletter today. It's super simple. Just go to MikeMalatesta.com right now, put in your email, and you will get the very next issue. It's short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you. So, what do I like about it? Why am I talking about it? Why do I think you should give Founders a try? Well, first, his mission is impressive. David's mission is impressive. So, like who can read a biography a week and then, synthesize it to talk about it? I cannot do that. So I'm impressed by that. Second, it's informative. Knowing and understanding more about the lives of the people who've started some of the best known corporations in the world makes me feel informed and smart. I mean, it's one of the reasons I listen to podcasts in general is to become more informed. Most of the ones I listen to are informed. I do listen to some where I want the comedy or something, like Dana Carvey and David Spades. I think is really funny, but I want to be more informed, and his podcast keeps you informed and makes you smart. Third, it's instructive and challenging. As I listen, I'm thinking, how can I use what I'm hearing to improve my companies, to improve my capabilities, and to improve my opportunities to be a better leader, be a better creator, be a better founder, be a better entrepreneur. And finally, learning more about the people and the origins of some of the greatest entrepreneurial companies. And by the way, almost all great companies begin with a single or a small group of entrepreneurs that many people thought were nuts for doing what they were doing. So if you feel that way, don't feel bad, because most of these stories, the people in them were in your shoes at the time that they started as well. But getting to hear about those origins is just flat out fascinating. And why is it important to study the past? Well, it's important to study the past. Is it important to study the past because it repeats itself? No, that's often what we're told, but I'm not sure that that's often what's true. I'm not sure that history actually repeats itself. And David talks about this all the time. Whether history repeats itself or not, one thing that we can all be sure about is that human nature most definitely does. Human nature repeats itself. And that's why I think more of the reason why history appears to repeat itself, because we as humans, as people, we repeat ourselves. We often make the same mistakes, for example, as those who've come before us. So listening to these podcasts and listening to him synthesizing these biographies is a great way to try to avoid having at least the bad part of human nature repeating itself, which is the mistakes, avoiding that. And on the other side of that coin, getting the benefit of the good side of human nature that repeats itself, the valuable lessons of human nature that repeat themselves, and that he talks about in these podcasts. And that's the value of studying the past. So check out Founders and see what you think. They're about an hour long or so, maybe a little shorter sometimes. I think you're going to love it. I think you're going to love the energy. I wish I had come up with the idea, but then I would also need to be able to read a biography a week, which would definitely be a challenge for me. So I'm glad that he's doing the work. And the one final thing is he ends every podcast with whatever biography or episode it is. Say it's episode 270. I'll say, well, that's 270 biographies read, 1,000 to go. He always says 1,000 to go, which I think is pretty cool as well. So check it out, Founders. And I thank you very much for investing your time in me today. I hope that you've got a positive return on that, which is my goal. And if you did, please share the episode and follow or subscribe to the podcast so that every episode comes to you automatically. Until next time, maximize your greatness and make your future your property, something that you design and are proud to own. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.